It wasn't the voice of the committee chair. It wasn't the squeak of the cheap institutional chair beneath me. It was the hum of the projector, a low electrical drone, like a dentist drill in the next room, or the sound of a future dying. Room 304 in the engineering building always smelled of old chalk and stale carpet. On that Tuesday, it was joined by the scent of my own sweat, cold, tacky sweat that had soaked through my undershirt before I even walked through the door. I adjusted my tie. My hands were shaking. Not violently, but enough that I kept them hidden under the laminate table. It was 10 a.m. My PhD defense was supposed to begin. 3 people sat across from me. On the left was Dr. Hayes. He was an emeritus who fell asleep during half his lectures. He was already polishing his spectacles and glancing at the clock. He didn't care. On the right was Dr. Kapoor. She was sharp, academic, and fair, the only person in this building I actually respected. She was flipping through the printed copy of my dissertation, her brow furrowed, and in the center, Professor Arthur Sterling, my advisor, my mentor, the man who held my F1 visa status in his desk drawer like a loaded gun pressed against my temple. He was smiling. It wasn't the warm, charismatic smile he used for university donors or TEDx stages. It was the smile of a predator who had finally cornered a meal and realized there were no exits left. "Kenji," Sterling said. His voice was velvet, rich. "We are ready when you are." I nodded. I couldn't speak yet. My throat felt like I'd been swallowing sand. I stood up. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, wooden and heavy. I had spent 4 years for this moment, 4 years of 80-hour weeks, 4 years of sleeping on a folding cot in the server room because the neural net rendering required constant monitoring. I had missed my sister's wedding in Osaka. I had missed my grandfather's funeral. I had given this research everything I was, and everything I hoped to be. My algorithm, the Neural-Synaptic Bridging Protocol, was a revolution. I knew it. Sterling knew it. It solved the signal latency problem in prosthetic limbs. It was the code that would allow a veteran to feel a touch on the fingers of a bionic hand in real time. It was my masterpiece. I pressed the button on the clicker. The screen behind me flared to life. Slide 1, the title page. I turned around to make sure the projection was aligned, and the world stopped. Time didn't just slow down, it ceased to exist. My heart skipped a beat, then another, then seemed to forget how to rhythmically contract altogether. It wasn't my presentation. The background was the same, the dark navy university template. The graphs were mine. I recognized them instantly. I had plotted those signal distribution curves at 3 a.m. 2 weeks ago. I knew every pixel, every outlier in the data, but the text was different. In massive, bold white letters, the screen read, "The Sterling Architecture, a proprietary system for neural interface, presented by Dr. Arthur Sterling, lead inventor, assisted by Kenji Tanaka, research assistant." I felt the blood drain from my face so fast I thought I might faint. My stomach did a slow, nauseating flip. This wasn't a defense. My name had been relegated to a footnote, a research assistant. I looked at Sterling. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look like there had been a technical glitch. He just leaned back, folded his hands over his expensive silk vest, and gave me a tiny, imperceptible nod. A signal. "Play along or I'll deport you before lunch." I looked at Dr. Kapoor. She was staring at the screen, then at me, her eyes narrowing. She knew something was wrong. But I was the one at the podium. I was the one holding the clicker. "Is there a problem, Kenji?" Sterling asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. "You look a bit pale. Should we proceed with the presentation of my latest findings?" The "my" hit me like a physical blow. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. I looked down at the clicker in my hand. It felt like a detonator. If I spoke up now, I was done. He'd pull my funding. He'd revoke my sponsorship. I'd be on a plane back to Japan within 48 hours, 4 years of my life erased, my reputation in tatters because who would believe a student over a world-renowned professor? But if I stayed silent, If I stayed silent, he would walk out of this room with a multi-million-dollar patent, and I would walk out with a degree that didn't even belong to me. I gripped the podium until my knuckles turned white. I could feel the bile rising in the back of my throat. I looked at the sterling architecture title on the screen. It was a lie. It was a theft of the highest order. Actually, Professor, I said. My voice was thin, but it didn't crack. There seems to be an error with the file. This is an older draft. Sterling's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned into chips of ice. I don't think so, Kenji. This is the finalized version I uploaded to the server this morning. Please, continue. We don't have all day. He was daring me. He was standing on my neck and asking me why I couldn't breathe. I looked at the committee. I looked at the camera in the corner of the room that recorded all defenses for the university archives. I took a deep breath. The smell of the old carpet seemed stronger now. You're right, Professor, I said, a strange, cold calm suddenly settling over me. We don't have all day. Let's talk about the true nature of this system. But let me back up, because to understand how I ended up in that room, facing down a man who could destroy my life with a phone call, you have to understand the 4 years of hell that led to that moment. You have to understand the dungeon. The dungeon wasn't its official name. On the university directory, it was listed as the Neural Systems Research Annex, Basement Level 2. But to those of us who spent more time there than in our own beds, it was the dungeon. It was a windowless, concrete-walled labyrinth lit by flickering industrial fluorescence that hummed in a B-flat tone that drove you crazy if you sat in silence for too long. I remember my first day. I was 24, fresh-faced, and incredibly naive. I had been recruited by Professor Sterling himself. At the time, it felt like being chosen by a god. Sterling was the face of the university's engineering department. He was on the cover of Science magazine. He had a $20 million grant from the Department of Defense. When he shook my hand at the orientation, his grip was firm and his eyes seemed to sparkle with genuine intellectual curiosity. Kenji, he had told me, leaning in, as if sharing a secret, you have a rare mind. Most students can build a model. Very few can see the soul within the data. Come work for me, and we will change the way humans interact with machines forever. I would have followed him into a burning building for that kind of praise. The first year was a blur of excitement. My task was simple but grueling: optimize the bridge between biological neural pulses and synthetic processors. In simpler terms, I was building the translator that allowed a human brain to talk to a robot arm without the lag that makes current prosthetics feel like heavy, clunky tools instead of part of the body. But as the months bled into years, excitement turned into a slow, grinding isolation. Sterling's management style was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He didn't use a whip, he used a tether. It was the F1 student visa. For an international student, that piece of paper is your entire world. If you lose your good standing with your advisor, they can terminate your research position. If the position ends, the visa is revoked. If the visa is revoked, you have 48 hours to leave the country. Everything I had worked for, my future, my family's pride, my career, was tied to Sterling's signature. You're doing great work, Kenji, he'd say during our 11 p.m. check-ins. He'd always show up late, smelling of expensive bourbon and steak, while I was eating lukewarm instant ramen over a glowing monitor. But the committee, they're worried about your progress. They think you're moving too slowly. I'm defending you, of course. I'm telling them you need more time, but you need to give me something more. More data, more breakthroughs. It was a classic gaslighting technique. He was the one setting the impossible deadlines. He was the one adding side projects to my plate, writing his grant proposals, grading his undergraduate papers, even running his personal errands, and then blaming the committee for the lack of progress on my actual dissertation. By the second year, the dungeon had become my entire universe. I saw the sun maybe twice a week. My skin took on a grayish, sickly hue. My social life was non-existent. I had a girlfriend when I started, a brilliant girl named Hannah from the architecture school. She tried to wait for me. She tried to bring me dinner. But after I missed her birthday, our anniversary, and then a surgery she had to go through because I couldn't leave the lab during a critical render, she finally left. "You aren't a student, Kenji," she told me through tears as she packed her things. "You're a ghost, and Sterling is the one haunting you." I wanted to scream that she was right, but I couldn't. I was too tired. I was too deep in the code. I believed that if I just reached the breakthrough, if I just finished the protocol, the nightmare would end. Sterling promised that once the Neural-Synaptic Bridging Protocol was stable, he would fast-track my defense and give me a glowing recommendation for a senior researcher position at MIT. The technical side of the work was where I found my only solace. The protocol was beautiful. I was designing a system that didn't just read brainwaves, it predicted them. I used a recursive neural network that could anticipate the user's intent 50 milliseconds before the muscle would have naturally moved. To a normal person, 50 milliseconds is nothing. To a person with a prosthetic, it's the difference between fumbling a glass of water and catching it with the grace of a natural hand. I kept all my code on the lab secure server, but I was smart, or so I thought. I kept a localized backup on an encrypted drive I hid inside an old, hollowed-out PC power supply under my desk. The first real red flag appeared in my third year. I had just finished a successful pilot test with a volunteer, a former soldier who had lost his arm in Iraq. For the first time in a decade, he was able to pick up a grape without crushing it. He cried. I cried. The next morning, Sterling came into the lab. He wasn't smiling. "Kenji, the data from yesterday's trial. Why isn't it on the shared drive?" "I'm still cleaning up the noise in the signal, Professor," I explained. I wanted to make sure the metrics were perfect before I uploaded them. He stepped into my personal space. He was a tall man, and he used his height to intimidate. "I don't care about clean. I care about the raw data. In fact, from now on, I want all your source code mirrored to my private terminal for backup purposes. You've been looking stressed. I don't want a hardware failure to ruin your hard work." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lab's air conditioning. "Your private terminal? But the department policy says..." "The department policy is what I say it is, Kenji," he snapped. Then his voice softened instantly. He put a fatherly hand on my shoulder. "Look, I'm just trying to protect you. There are people in this university, vultures, who would love to steal a project this big. If the code is on my terminal, I can ensure it's legally protected under my name, for the sake of the lab, of course, under his name." That was the moment I should have walked away, but I looked at the framed photo of my parents on my desk. They had spent their life savings to send me here. If I quit, I was a failure. If I stayed, I was a slave. I chose to stay. I chose to believe his lies because the alternative was too terrifying to face. I started mirroring the code. I started giving him the keys to the kingdom I had built with my own blood and sweat. I didn't realize that Sterling wasn't just planning to take credit. He was already in talks with a massive private defense contractor called Aegis Biotics. He was selling them the bridge I was building, promising them exclusive ownership of a technology he didn't even understand. But there was one thing Sterling forgot. He was a businessman. He was a politician. He was a great idea man. But he wasn't a coder. He hadn't looked at the actual logic gates of the protocol in years. He didn't know that every time I updated the system, I left a fingerprint deep in the architecture. A small, hidden string of code that did nothing unless you knew exactly how to trigger it. As my fourth year began, the pressure became unbearable. Sterling started blocking my attempts to publish. Every paper I wrote was not quite ready. Every conference I wanted to attend was a distraction. He was keeping me in the dark, keeping the research hidden from the public eye, and I was the one digging the grave. By the start of my 4th year, the atmosphere in the lab didn't just feel heavy, it felt radioactive. The fatherly version of Professor Sterling had vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating manager who treated me like an aging piece of hardware. I was no longer a student, I was a black box processor. He wanted inputs, and he wanted them yesterday. I stopped going home. My apartment, a tiny studio 6 blocks away, became a graveyard for unpaid bills and dead houseplants. I slept on the floor of the lab, using a stack of technical manuals as a pillow. My diet consisted of lukewarm coffee and the granola bars I could scavenge from the department's break room. The first real crack in the facade happened on a rainy Tuesday in November. Sterling was at a high-level gala in D.C., leaving the lab empty for the first time in weeks. I was running a stability test on the 0.98 build of the protocol, waiting for the neural noise to settle. I needed a specific reference manual on biometric encryption, one I knew Sterling kept in his office. Usually, his door was locked, but the departmental janitor, a guy named Mike who I'd shared many midnight cigarettes with, had left it propped open while he emptied the trash. I slipped inside. Sterling's office was the polar opposite of the dungeon. It was all mahogany, glass, and leather. On the walls were photos of him with senators, tech CEOs, and university deans. It was a monument to his ego. I found the manual on his bookshelf, but as I pulled it out, it knocked over a stack of papers on his desk. As I knelt to pick them up, a logo caught my eye, a stylized gold eagle, Aegis Biotics. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew the name. They were the biggest private military contractor in the country. They specialized in enhanced soldier tech. I shouldn't have looked. I should have put the papers back and run, but my hands moved on their own. I started flipping through the folder. It wasn't a research proposal. It was an asset purchase agreement. I read the words, but my brain refused to process them. Exclusive global rights to the Neural-Synaptic Bridging Protocol, hereafter referred to as the Sterling Drive. Total consideration, $5.20 million USD. Royalty structure, 15% to lead inventor Arthur Sterling. My name wasn't there, not once. There was a subclause at the bottom that made my blood turn to ice. Condition of sale, lead inventor must demonstrate full operational control and proprietary source code ownership by the end of Q4. All subordinate research staff, research assistants, grad students must be terminated or transferred upon completion of the defense to ensure total IP containment. Total IP containment. That was the academic version of claiming the witness. He wasn't just stealing my work. He was planning to wipe me out of the system entirely. He was going to take the degree, take the money, and let my visa expire so I'd be deported and unable to sue him from 6,000 miles away. I felt a sudden sharp pain in my chest. It was a panic attack, though I didn't know it then. I leaned against the mahogany desk, gasping for air. The walls of the office seemed to shriek. I looked at the date on the contract. "What do you want?" And I saw. It had been signed 3 months ago. Every late night, every "you're doing great, Kenji," every time he told me he was defending me to the committee, it was all a setup. He was fattening me up for the slaughter. He needed me to finish the code so he could hand the Sterling Drive over to Aegis. Once the code was stable, I was disposable. I heard footsteps in the hall, heavy, rhythmic. Mike the janitor. I shoved the papers back into the folder, placed the manual back on the shelf, and scrambled out of the office. I didn't go back to my desk. I locked myself in the bathroom stall and vomited until there was nothing left but yellow bile. That night, I didn't work on the protocol. I sat in the dark, watching the green lights of the servers flicker. The realization hit me. I was a ghost. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of the university, Sterling was the inventor. He had the grants. He had the reputation. He had the signature on the Aegis contract. If I went to the dean, Sterling would claim I was a disgruntled student with mental health issues. He'd point to the mirrored code on his terminal as proof of his ownership. I was trapped in a box of my own making. But then I remembered the dungeon rule. In the basement, we don't have mahogany desks or senators on the phone. We have the silicon. We have the logic. Sterling was a brilliant salesman, but he was a lazy engineer. He hadn't touched the low-level assembly code in years. He thought a neural net was a black box. You put data in, you get results out. He didn't realize that I hadn't just built a bridge. I had built a gate. I pulled my hidden drive out of the hollowed-out power supply. "You want the Sterling drive, Arthur," I whispered to the empty room. "I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you exactly the way you deserve." I began to write. I didn't change the algorithm's performance. In fact, I made it better. I optimized the predictive modeling until the latency was almost zero. I wanted the system to look flawless. I wanted it to be the most beautiful thing the committee had ever seen. But deep within the core, hidden inside a nested loop of the encryption handshake, I inserted a conditional logic bomb. It was a simple piece of code. It would remain dormant as long as the system was running in simulation mode or lab mode. But the moment the system was switched to live deployment or commercial license mode, the very mode Sterling would have to use to demonstrate the tech to Aegis, the logic bomb would trigger. It wouldn't crash the system. That would be too obvious. Instead, it would trigger a secondary display output. It would scrape the lab's private server for every email, every draft, and every timestamped commit log associated with my user ID. It would compile a side-by-side comparison of the Sterling architecture versus the original Kenji protocol. And it would do it on every screen connected to the network. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the perfect broken student. I worked harder than ever. I apologized for moving slowly. I handed Sterling the finalized source code with a shaking hand, letting him think it was out of fear. He loved it. He practically purred. He even gave me a $50 gift card to a local coffee shop as a bonus. "You're a good kid, Kenji," he said, patting my shoulder as he copied the code to his private Aegis encrypted drive. "The committee is scheduled for the 15th. Let's make history." "Yes, Professor," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Let's." The trap was set. Now, I just had to survive the wait. The week before the defense was the coldest on record. A biting wind whipped off the river, whistling through the cracks in the engineering building's foundation, but I barely felt it. I was living in a state of hyper-focused dissociation. I was a ghost inhabiting a shell, watching myself perform the tasks of a PhD candidate while my mind lived entirely inside the lines of code I had planted. Then, 3 days before the scheduled defense, the final hammer dropped. I was in the lab at 4 a.m., running a final diagnostic, when Sterling walked in. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing workout gear, looking refreshed, smelling of expensive cologne and the brisk morning air. He looked at me, haggard, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, with a look of pure, clinical disgust. "Kenji," he said, not even bothering to sit down. "Change of plans. The graduate school office flagged discrepancy in your credit hours. It seems you're 1 seminar short of the requirements to defend this semester." I froze. My hand stayed hovered over the keyboard. "That's impossible, Professor. I checked with the registrar in August. I have the emails. I'm cleared." "Well," he sighed, a sound of fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. "The registrar was wrong. These things happen. I tried to argue for a waiver, but the dean is being a stickler. We're going to have to push your defense back to the spring." The spring. My visa expired in 3 weeks. "Professor, if I don't defend now, my F1 status—" I know, he interrupted, waving a hand as if swatting away a fly. "It's a tragedy, but look on the bright side. This gives us more time to rend the Sterling architecture. In fact, since you won't be a registered student next month, you'll need to vacate the lab. I've already arranged for a new postdoc to take over your terminal. You can hand over your key card to department security by Friday." He was doing it. The total IP containment clause from the Aegis contract. He was purging me. He didn't even need me to be at the defense anymore. He had the code. He had the slides. And now he was simply deleting me from the building. "What about my degree?" I asked. My voice sounded like it was coming from a long way away. Sterling finally looked at me, and the mask slipped entirely. There was no more fatherly mentor. There was just a man who had stolen a kingdom and was tired of looking at the person he'd robbed. "Let's be honest, Kenji. You were a technician." "A very good one, yes. But the vision, the architecture, that was mine. You've been compensated with a stipend and a roof over your head for 4 years. Consider that your payment. As for the degree, maybe you can try again in Japan. I hear they have some decent tech schools in Osaka." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Oh, and don't bother talking to the dean. I've already submitted my formal evaluation of your unstable performance this semester." It's for your own good, really. You're burnt out. You need a long, long break. He left. I sat in the silence of the dungeon. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was heavy, like a stone sinking into a dark lake. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my work. I was fighting for my existence. To Sterling, I was a line item, a tool that had outlived its uselessness. But he had made one fatal mistake. He thought the defense was being pushed back for everyone. That afternoon, I waited until Sterling left for his daily 2-hour power lunch at the university club. I walked up to the graduate school office. I didn't go to the front desk. I went straight to the office of Sarah, the administrative assistant, who had worked there for 20 years and who I'd helped fix her laptop's corrupted hard drive 6 months ago. Kenji, she smiled. Ready for the big day on Thursday? Sarah, I said, leaning over her desk. Professor Sterling mentioned there was a credit hour discrepancy on my file. He said the dean was flagging it. Sarah frowned, her fingers lying across her mechanical keyboard. She pulled up my internal transcript. Discrepancy. No, you're at 92 hours. Requirement is 90. You're golden. And the dean hasn't looked at a student file in weeks. He's in Switzerland for a conference. My blood began to simmer. Is the defense still on the official calendar for Thursday at 10 a.m.? Of course, she said. Room 304. I just sent the confirmation emails to the committee members, Dr. Hayes and Dr. Kapoor, this morning. Why? Did Sterling say something else? No, I walked out of the office with a terrifying realization. He was only telling me it was canceled. He was going to walk into room 304 on Thursday morning. He was going to tell the committee that I had suffered a mental breakdown and was unable to attend. Then he was going to present my research as his own lead inventor breakthrough, secure the committee's sign-off on the technical validity, and then walk straight to the Aegis Biotics meeting to collect his $5 million. By the time I found out, he'd have the patent, and I'd be in a TSA line at JFK. I went back to the dungeon. I didn't pack my bags. I didn't cry. I opened the terminal. I accessed the logic bomb I had planted. I realized it wasn't enough. If I wasn't there to explain it, he might find a way to spin the glitch as hacker interference or a corrupted file. No, I needed to be the one to trigger it. I needed to be the one to hold the knife. I spent the next 48 hours in a fever dream of productivity. I bypassed the lab's outbound firewall. I set up a remote access tunnel from my personal laptop to the server's primary display driver. I also did something I had never dared to do before. I used my access to the university's internal mail server to look for Sterling's private correspondence with Aegis. I found it, a series of emails detailing the disposal of the research assistant. Subject, IP security. Don't worry about the student. One email from Sterling read, his visa is tied to Ma's signature. Once the defense is validated by the university, I'll terminate his sponsorship. He'll be out of the country before the patent office even opens. The code is clean. He's been a good little worker bee, but it's time to smoke out the hive. I saved the email. I saved the Aegis contract. I saved the time-stamped logs of my 4 a.m. coding sessions from 3 years ago. I compiled them into a single high-resolution video file. I formatted it to look exactly like a system error log. On Wednesday night, the night before the canceled defense, I didn't sleep at all. I shaved. I cut my hair. I put on the one expensive suit my parents had bought me for my graduation, the graduation that wasn't supposed to happen. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror of the basement bathroom. I didn't look like a student anymore. I looked like a ghost that had decided to stop haunting the basement and start haunting the man who put him there. At 9:45 a.m. on Thursday, I walked toward room 304. I saw Sterling standing in the hallway. He was wearing a $3,000 suit, laughing with Dr. Hayes. He looked like the king of the world. He didn't see me yet. He was too busy basking in the glow of his impending fortune. He had the thumb drive with the Sterling architecture in his hand, twirling it like a toy. I felt the weight of my own laptop in my bag. I felt the remote trigger script sitting in my pocket on my phone. The humiliation was over. The execution was about to begin. The hour between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. was a masterpiece of tactical preparation. While Sterling was upstairs playing the part of the visionary genius, I was performing a digital lobotomy on the department's network. I knew I couldn't just walk in and scream he stole my work. In the academic world, that's called unprofessional conduct. I would be escorted out by security, and Sterling would use it as proof of the mental breakdown. He'd already warned the dean about, no, for this to work, the system had to betray him. The technology he claimed to have invented had to be the one to testify against him. I went to the North Lab, a secondary computer cluster that was usually empty on Thursday mornings. I sat at Terminal 14, tucked behind a pillar. My first task was the handshake override. The university's presentation rooms used a centralized server to host slide decks. I didn't want to replace Sterling's file, I wanted to augment it. I accessed the projector's IP address, something I'd mapped out months ago while helping the IT department as a side gig. I installed a small, transparent script I called the Mirror. It was designed to watch for a specific trigger, the activation of the neural simulated live demo. Sterling's biggest selling point to Aegis Biotics wasn't the slides, it was the live bridge demonstration. He had a pre-recorded neural data set from our soldier volunteer, and he was going to run it through the Sterling drive to show how the prosthetic hand responded with zero latency. I wrote a subroutine that would monitor the data packets when the simulation hit the 60-second mark. The moment when the soldier in the demo would pick up the grape, my script would redirect the secondary video output. But I needed more than just a glitch. I needed a legal kill shot. I opened the encrypted folder containing the Aegis contract and the emails I'd swiped from Sterling's office. I didn't just want to show them, I wanted them to be undeniable. I used a metadata forensic tool to extract the origin headers of the emails. It showed that Sterling had been sending my raw code to Aegis servers from his university computer during hours I was logged in and working. November 14th, 03:15 a.m., Kenji Tanaka commits bridge_v9.cpp to server 11/14, 03:22 a.m. Arthur Sterling forwards bridge_v9.cpp to contact at aegis-biotics.com. The timestamps were the heartbeat of the betrayal. They proved that I was the creator and he was the courier. I compiled these logs into a system diagnostic overlay. To an untrained eye, it would look like the computer was just displaying background processes. To the committee, especially Dr. Kapoor, it would look like a confession. Then came the final touch, the kill switch. Sterling had a bad habit of using the same password for everything, S-Terling1. I had seen him type it 100 times. I logged into his university faculty portal. I didn't change his password. That would alert him. Instead, I set up a forwarding rule for his entire inbox. Starting at 10:15 a.m., every email he had ever sent or received regarding Aegis Biotics would be CC'd to the university provost, the Office of Research Integrity, and the legal department of our biggest rival university across town. I was burning the bridges while I was still standing on them. I checked my phone. 9:52 a.m. I packed my laptop. I felt a strange cold sensation in my chest. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling of a man who has already died once and has nothing left to lose. Sterling had taken my past, my sleep, and my relationship. He was trying to take my future. I walked toward room 304. As I approached, I saw a man in a very expensive, dark gray suit standing outside the door. He was holding a briefcase with a small gold eagle on the latch. Aegis Biotics was here. They weren't just waiting for the patent. They had sent a representative to witness the lead inventor validate the tech. Sterling wasn't just defending a thesis. He was closing a deal. I leaned against the wall around the corner, hidden from view. I watched Sterling greet the Aegis rep with a booming laugh and a vigorous handshake. "Everything is ready, Marcus," Sterling said. "The student is out of the picture. We have a clear path to the commercial license. This demo is going to change the industry." "Good," the Aegis man said. His voice was like gravel. "Our board is ready to move. Just make sure the committee signs off on the technical IP ownership. We can't have any unaccounted for contributors popping up later." "Don't worry," Sterling smirked, adjusting his cuffs. There are no unaccounted for contributors. Just me. They walked into the room. The door, heavy, oak, and final, clicked shut behind them. I waited 60 seconds. I took a breath, smoothed down my suit, and pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the remote access app. The screen showed a single button, Initiate Overlay. I didn't press it yet. I walked to the door. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I pushed it open and walked into the lion's den. The room went silent. Dr. Hayes dropped his pen. Dr. Kapir looked up, her eyebrows shooting toward her hairline. Sterling turned, his face morphing from a smug grin into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. His eyes screamed at me to get out, but his mouth stayed frozen in front of the Aegis representative and the committee. "Kenji," he hissed, his voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" "I told you, I'm here for my defense, Professor," I said. My voice was loud. It was clear. It filled the room. "I believe we're running a bit behind schedule. Shall we begin?" I didn't wait for him to answer. I walked straight to the second podium, the one usually reserved for the questioning chair, and opened my laptop. The war had started. The silence in room 304 was thick enough to choke on. Professor Sterling stood frozen, his hand still hovering over his own laptop, his face a fluctuating shade of crimson and ashen white. He looked at the Aegis representative, Marcus, who was already frowning, his hand tightening on his briefcase. He looked at the committee. Then he looked at me. "Kenji," Sterling said, his voice forced through a tight, artificial smile. "I thought we discussed this. You've been under a lot of stress. Perhaps you should step outside so we can—" "I'm fine, Arthur," I said. I had never called him by his first name before. The visible flinch he gave was the most satisfying thing I'd felt in years. The credit discrepancy Sarah and the graduate office helped me clear up was just a clerical error. I'm fully eligible. And since this is my dissertation, it would be highly irregular to proceed without me, wouldn't it? Dr. Kapoor leaned forward, her eyes darting between us like she was watching a high-stakes tennis match. "He's right, Arthur. If the candidate is here and the paperwork is clear, we must proceed. Please, Kenji, take your place." Sterling had no choice. To argue further would make him look unhinged in front of a $5 million investor. He retreated to the side of the room, his eyes burning into the side of my head. I could practically hear him calculating how he was going to destroy me the second the door opened. "Thank you," I said. I plugged my HDMI cable into the system. "Today, we are discussing the Neural-Synaptic Bridging Protocol. Professor Sterling has already introduced the broad strokes of the Sterling architecture. I would like to move directly to the live simulation to demonstrate the stability of the low-level logic." I looked at Marcus from Aegis. I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "Professor, would you do the honors of initiating the primary drive?" "Since it is your architecture, you know the handshake sequence better than anyone." I was baiting him. I was handing him the gun, knowing I had plugged the barrel. Sterling, eager to reclaim authority, marched to his laptop. "Gladly," he barked. He typed in his password, S-T-ERLINDS1, and hit enter with a flourish. The giant screen behind me shifted. The simulation window opened. It was a 3D render of a prosthetic hand, mapped to the real-time neural data of the soldier we had tested. "As you can see," Sterling narrated, trying to regain his visionary tone, "the latency is sub-zero. The intent-to-action window is—" The clock hit the 60-second mark. Suddenly, the 3D hand on the screen flickered. A bright red line of text scrolled across the bottom of the projection. "Critical overlay. Source authentication mismatch." Sterling paused. "Just a minor diagnostic glitch," he muttered, his fingers flying across the keys. He tried to clear the notification. It wouldn't budge. I tapped a key on my laptop. The logic bomb didn't crash the demo. It did something much worse. It split the screen. On the left side, the simulation continued. On the right side, a window labeled Origin Logs, Directory, US, Doctory, Cat Naka, Lab Archive appeared. "What is this?" Dr. Hayes asked, squinting through his glasses. "It appears to be a transparency audit, Dr. Hayes," I said calmly. "The system is simply displaying the time-stamped development logs to verify the IP ownership required for the Aegis contract. Sterling's face went from red to a ghostly, translucent gray. "Shut it down! Kenji, what did you do?" "You've corrupted the file." He lunged for the power cable, but Dr. Kapoor stood up. "Sit down, Arthur. I want to see this." The screen was now a waterfall of evidence. IAMKTAKCOPILE COPIKKEN 9.2 AMASTRLIN COPIPKKK 10.2 TOECMMPE. Vance Agus Biotics. The student is a non-issue. I've blocked his publications. Once he defends, I'll pull his visa sponsorship. He'll be in Japan before the check clears. The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the hum of the projector and the heavy, ragged breathing of Arthur Sterling. Marcus, the Aegis representative, stood up slowly. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at Sterling. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was the cold, professional realization that he was standing next to a liability. "Arthur," Marcus said, his voice like a sheet of ice cracking, "explain this. It's a hack." Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. He looked like a cornered animal. "He's a disgruntled student. He's obsessed. He's fabricated these lies." "Fabricated?" I asked. I hit one more key. "Then why is the system currently broadcasting these same logs to the university provost, the board of ethics, and your contact at Aegis, Marcus?" Sterling collapsed back into his chair. He looked small. For the first time in 4 years, the dungeon felt like it was his, not mine. I turned back to the committee. "The Neural-Synaptic Bridging Protocol is a success," I said, my voice steady. "But as the logs show, it was developed by Kenji Tanaka. Professor Sterling's contribution was purely administrative. He was the courier. I was the architect." Dr. Kapoor looked at the screen, then at me. There was a glimmer of something in her eyes. It might have been pride. It might have been shock. But mostly, it was justice. "I think," she said, her voice echoing in the small room, "that we have seen enough for one morning." Sterling tried to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at Marcus, but the Aegis rep was already halfway to the door, his phone to his ear, likely calling his legal team to distance the company from the radioactive ruin that was now Arthur Sterling's career. I reached out and pressed the stop button on the projector. The room went dark. "Is there any other business for the committee?" I asked. Sterling didn't move. He just stared at the blank screen where his $5 million dream had just evaporated into a string of time-stamped lies. The walk out of room 304 was the quietest walk of my life. I didn't wait for the committee to deliberate. I didn't wait for the campus security that Dr. Kapoor eventually called to escort Sterling from the building. I just packed my laptop, tucked my father's suit jacket under my arm, and walked out into the winter air. For the first time in 4 years, the air didn't smell like chalk or ozone. It just smelled like snow. The fallout was a slow-motion car crash that dominated the university's headlines for months. Because I had CC'd the provost and the Office of Research Integrity, the university couldn't sweep it under the rug. An internal audit revealed that Sterling had been skimming grant money to fund his lifestyle and had similar uncredited arrangements with 3 other former students who had since disappeared back to their home countries. Sterling wasn't just fired, he was erased. The university stripped him of his tenure and his emeritus status. Aegis Biotics sued him for breach of contract and fraud, seeking to recover the pre-consultation fees they'd already funneled into his offshore accounts. Last I heard, he was selling consulting services for a multi-level marketing scheme out of a rented condo in Florida. The Sterling architecture was dead. But I wasn't. Dr. Kapoor took over as my interim advisor. She didn't make me redo the 4 years of work. She spent a weekend reviewing my original unmirrored source code, and 3 weeks later, she called me into her office, the real office, not the dungeon. "Kenji, she said, sliding a leather-bound folder across the desk. The committee has reviewed the forensic logs and your original thesis. We reached a decision. I opened the folder. Doctor of Philosophy in Neural Engineering, awarded. I didn't cry. I just felt a great, heavy weight lift off my shoulders, leaving me feeling strangely light, like a diver finally surfacing for air. But the best part wasn't the degree, it was the patent. Because I had time-stamped every single line of code and proved that Sterling's improvements were actually just my own optimizations. The university's legal team had to admit that the intellectual property belonged to me. The contract with Aegis was voided, which was fine by me. I didn't want my tech being used for enhanced soldiers anyway. Instead, I took that patent and I did something else. I reached out to the soldier from the trial, the man who had picked up the grape and cried. I told him I was starting a small, nonprofit lab. I called it Synapse Open Source. I released the Neural-Synaptic Bridging Protocol to the public. I made it open source. Now, any prosthetic company in the world, from India to Brazil, can use my bridge for free. I didn't want $5 million in a silk vest. I wanted 1,000 more people to be able to feel the hand of their child or the texture of a piece of fruit. Today, I live in a small apartment with a balcony. I have actual plants that are actually alive. I have a cat named Pixel who likes to sit on my keyboard when I'm trying to work. And I have a job, a real one, as the lead of neural research for a medical robotics firm that actually values its humans as much as its hardware. Sometimes when I'm working late, I catch myself looking at the clock. I start to feel that old familiar panic, the fear that someone is watching the server logs, waiting to take what I've built. But then I look at my hand. I look at the window. I see the sun. I'm not a ghost anymore, and the dungeon is just a basement again.